welcome back to Counseling Black Women Present Roundtable Talks. Today we're going to be talking about what it means to be a high-achieving Black woman. I'm Dr. Kimber Shelton. I'm a licensed counseling psychologist in Dallas, Texas. My practice is called KLS Counseling and Consulting Services. And I'm also one of the co-editors and authors of a handbook on counseling African American women, which if you haven't gotten, please feel free to run and make that purchase. And this is an important topic for me. I like to identify myself as a retiring, high-achieving Black woman, but just really understanding what that means to be Black and then also be striving for that Black excellence until, for myself, I was burnt out. So I'll be looking forward to hearing more about your all experiences and sharing more about my history as being high-achieving.
Hello, my name is Dr. Mahlet Endale, licensed counseling psychologist as well. I am based in Atlanta, in private practice, Crossroads Mental Wellness Services. I'm also co-editor and co-author of Handbook for Counseling African American Women, and happy to be here and really interested in kind of where we go with today's conversation.
Hi, I'd like to introduce myself as well. I'm Tamara D'Anjou Turner. I'm a clinical psychologist in the Atlanta area in private practice. I'm also a co-author of a chapter in a handbook on counseling African American women and a clinical assistant professor at Georgia State University. I also identify as a high-achieving Black woman, but I will say that I have probably about 5 years ago actively decided to let that go and let go of perfectionism from a standpoint of knowing it doesn't really guarantee anything, the things that we think it does.
And I will bring up the rear.
Yeah, we have our special guest with us today, Dr. Kensa Gunter.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Kensa Gunter. I'm a clinical and sports psychologist based in Atlanta, Georgia. I have a private practice, and I also have the opportunity to consult with individuals, teams, and organizations around the areas of mental health and mental performance. So very much so looking forward to this conversation about high achieving Black women, how we manage that, how we don't, and some of the things that we can do to better take care of ourselves. So again, thank you for the invitation and looking forward to the discussion.
Glad to have you here. And when you say teams, you mean teams like NBA teams and NFL teams?
I do, yes. Professional teams, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, going into a conversation about a high-achieving Black woman, what does it actually mean to be high-achieving, and how does that intersect with our identities as Black women?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is just this notion that you have to be excellent in every area, that there is little to no room for mistakes, for failure, even for pauses. Like you constantly not only have to be excellent, but you also have to be striving to continue to maintain that excellence. And like I said, in your professional life, in your personal life, and the accompanying concept that comes to mind for me is perfectionism. And so I imagine we'll get to that, but those are some of the things that immediately come to mind when I hear that phrase, high achieving. It really is tied to perfectionism when I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. And when I think of it, I think of being high achieving in every area. So I think of education, I think of career, I think of family, I think of even providing for family in all of the ways, like emotional support, financial support. So it just feels like it can be all encompassing and all consuming, you know, when you apply it to different areas of your life.
Mm-hmm.
As thinking about this for me, I think it's very telling. A little story. As we were planning even this get together and this conversation, Kimber sent email, getting our schedules, and then sent a follow-up email to me to say, hey, you haven't responded. And I was like, wait, am I supposed to be on this one? Because I haven't seen myself as a high achieving Black woman, right? And for me, that definition, I think it's because it speaks to a certain level of having arrived somewhere, some goal, some level of a certain capacity of performance that I don't see myself as being at or functioning at. And I wonder how many people are, what if that's part of the definition of high achieving, is that sense of there's always, the bar keeps moving further and further, and there's a sense of having to always elevate. And that's part of the journey.
Mm-hmm. There's no inline, that is always working to achieve, always working to attain. And then what we have achieved and attained, making sure that that's being maintained.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So curious, because you were all mentioning how this involves all facets of life, professional, educational, relational, that we're all in a major city. So I even think about the image of what it means to be high achieving and having to be put together, or what you're putting out into the world to show your success. So all those elements, and then tying that into a Black woman's identity, how does that striving for and maintaining perfection intersect with the identities of Black women?
I just feel like we have very little room. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
No, I just feel like we have very little room. I feel like the expectation that we have for ourselves and that others may have for us is so high. And I feel like society at times communicates this message that that expectation is to be maintained, right? And so I think when I think about Black women and how we have been the caretakers, the nurturers, the support, the anchors, like for the community, right? I mean, I think that's what speaks to me as well, is just this notion that if we aren't excellent, or if we aren't accomplishing something, not only does that impact us, but the community might then suffer. And so it just feels like an unspoken pressure, and an unspoken, like, essential need almost for us to be okay, so that everybody else can be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head of what my first reaction to was, like, it being born out of need initially has then now become part of the culture, and then part of the culture becomes part of this expectation externally, becomes part of our expectation internally, and sometimes we can't even differentiate where that starts and where that ends, and it can feel like a lot for a lot of people, because it feels like sometimes we don't give ourselves enough space to kind of make mistakes or to struggle, where people in other cultures can have room to make mistakes. I think, kind of to what Dr. Gunter was saying, like, it's so high. If you don't, sometimes for some people, if you don't achieve, like, your family's not eating, and or even, like, sometimes out of need, there can be family pressure from, like, extended family, that can sometimes can create feelings of guilt, and make it feel very heavy.
And you both go ahead,
Go
Mahlet.
ahead, Kim. I was going to say, the piece that you mentioned about not giving ourselves permission, to make mistakes. I also think about society not giving that permission and not giving that grace, and also that sense of having to prove yourself, and how, who am I being compared to, and how is it for somebody else to get to where I am, versus I'm having to kind of push and fight for even acknowledgement of where I am. I remember having a conversation with this older white gentleman. I can't remember even the context of it, and asking, just kind of small talk, polite conversation. And then of course the "what do you do" comes up, and I said, "I'm a psychologist," and he's like, "Wait, like a psychologist? I was like, "I don't know any other kind." Yes. And like, a licensed psychologist? Like, yes, a licensed psychologist. That's what I do professionally. And having that question, you don't even know me. And it starts with being questioned. And it, for me as a Black woman, trying to strive and trying to build, I don't know that we can get rid of this other piece of societal. How does society respond to us and acknowledge our achievements and our work and what we've put in?
Yeah. And I feel like that can even cause us to present in, like, to show markers of success, if that makes sense. So like pay a lot of attention to our clothes and our hair and our makeup and looking perfect externally, our cars, our houses, in order for that to be a protective factor in some ways.
Absolutely.
As you all are both talking, I'm thinking about Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and watching her process kind of unfold on TV and watching her have to prove over and over again her confidence and her knowledge and her clear mastery of her discipline, right? And then also thinking about the moment where she demonstrated that very human emotion, where she cried, right? Because she was so, this is my interpretation, so exhausted and frustrated, right? With having to be in that position of having to prove in the face of utter ridiculousness, right? And so I think about, in addition to everything that we've said, how sometimes being high achieving can put you in situations where you feel alone or isolated. You're one or one of a few, and it can really test kind of your resolve, right? Like not necessarily who you are. You can be very clear on who you are, but it can still test your resolve and just be such a heavy weight to try to have to hold while also still showing up with a certain level of poise, right? Because even in that moment, I think about how she could not fall apart, right? In the midst of us all watching kind of how she was being mistreated. That's what I'll call it. So as you were, it just, that image just came to mind for me of encompassing a lot of what it is that we're talking about. And we watched it.
The exhaustion behind it. And that there was a conversation that high achievement was born out of a need. And I'll extend that further. It was born out of a need to cope with and overcome gendered racism that Black women experience. So that historically, we could not be average. We absolutely could not be mediocre. We had to be the best. We had to be better to be able to achieve those mediocre benefits that mediocre white people were able to just obtain. So it's born out of that gender racism, and those isms, their job is meant to exhaust so that we can't continue that fight, which then leaves Black women maybe externally doing well and appearing to be doing well, but then internally could really be struggling or suffering, could be falling apart inside. Yeah, others don't know about it. So to think about that some more, to be high achieving, what are the benefits of it? And then what would be some of the consequences we face as Black women?
I mean, I think there are some perks to achieving success, right? I mean, you could think about certain positions that you're able to obtain that might be dream positions. I mean, I think about myself and some of the positions that I'm in and kind of constantly striving for excellence has yielded some benefits. I've had some opportunities that I never could have dreamed of within the field of sports psychology. I also think, as I just said, that sometimes being the only or one of few can sometimes feel isolating, but it also, if I think about the impact on those that see that, like it also opens up somebody's imagination for what is possible for them, right? So I think being or serving as that representation can really be a powerful thing. And although it can feel like a lonely journey maybe to get there, and maybe not that journey, because usually we have a tribe around us, but just the power of seeing someone that looks like you in certain positions and in certain spaces, to have that image reflected just opens up people's thoughts about what's possible for them. And so I think that's a benefit. And then there's some financial benefits and some perks that come with achieving. I mean, that's real, right? That come with achieving success. That doesn't take away from some of the challenges, but I think, you know, it can feel good to be in spaces and places where your effort is recognized and where you are valued and where you are put in positions that reflect what you actually are capable of bringing to the table.
Yeah, we're all
Yeah.
sitting here as licensed psychologists. We have careers that allow us to be very flexible. I'm working from home. There's opportunity to teach, there's opportunity to see clients, there's opportunity to do research. And since people find me typically to be pretty reliable, I find that experiences and opportunities are being brought my way, which comes from my previous history of success. And then also holding those pieces is all those things that created me to experience burnout, where I just couldn't get myself motivated. I couldn't I couldn't move how I knew myself to operate. I just wasn't able to operate in those ways and was very confused for a long time as to what was happening for me, because it was so uncommon for me to not have and be able to competently do 10 different things at a time. And even while I was experiencing burnout at that time, I had twin 2-year-olds and I was writing a book. So my burnout.
And that was your burnout phase.
That was my burnout. I was still doing a lot. So there are so many things that come with these opportunities. And then also it's given me an opportunity to do mentoring and to reach out to younger Black women or Black women newer to the field, but that burnout is real. And then it creates these expectations that others have for us that we just cannot maintain. And we should not have to maintain, because it dehumanizes us, that we don't get to have those breaks or we don't get to have those pauses. We don't have the opportunity to make mistakes. And then the higher we're rising, a lot of times we're going to be in more white spaces and more male dominated spaces, which again, even if we have that tribe outside, while we're doing the work, we can feel quite isolated and alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you two touched on what I've seen is a reluctance to let go of being high achieving for those reasons that you just detailed, right? Like, it's nice when people are excited to see you and admire you and look at you a certain way and put you in a certain place for those reasons. And so sometimes from the clients that I've seen a reluctance to let go of that because that feels so good, and like, what are people going to think of me? And what are people, if I am not this person that I've been this whole time, But then that also is part of the exhaustion piece, because then it also feels like, your relationships are tied to doing,
That reminds me, it just kind of, it speaks to our identity can get wrapped around what we do rather than who we are. And if you do hit that burnout stage, or there's a certain space where you connect with kind of your internal values and you realize, oh, this isn't it, I need to pivot, there can be a sense of identity loss. And who am I? And how do I show up in the world? What does that mean for me? That's also hard to kind of release. And it kind of complicates the journey as we're trying to really, what we're talking about is, how do you continue to stay connected to self? Where am I at any given point? What do I need? And can I respond to that? Can I honor that? And slow down when I need to, and I can pick back up. That'll come back again. Don't worry, you're not going to lose it. That's part of who we are, right? But there is that sense of, if I'm not go, then what's left? And am I going to lose everything?
Yeah, that, as you talked about identity, that was exactly what was in my head. I think about some of the athletes and performers I work with and how they can be very tied to their athletic identity. And so they start to connect their sense of value and worth with their performance, right? And so if I'm performing well, I feel good, I have worth, I have value. But if I'm not performing well, then I feel very negatively about myself. And so, Mahlet, you were talking about staying connected, right, to yourself. And I even think about just defining who you are outside of what you do, right? Exactly. Because we don't often give ourselves permission to even do that, right? Like, we become our identities become very intertwined with not only what we do, but even sometimes what we're giving to others, and not really even considering how we're showing up for ourselves, right? Like, it just feels like that's a huge element of that high achieving piece as well.
Building off of that, then when we are thinking about ourselves or when we're working with Black women who are trying to release themselves from that high achieving identity or retire that high achieving identity, what can we do to create better self-care, set up boundaries, to have a better balance so that our worth is not tied up in what we're doing and we can create or maintain the identities we have? What can Black women do to do that?
It feels so important to start that journey as early as possible, on that trajectory. When I think about pivots I've had to make in life, I made them because I had to. Literally, my wellness, my health I'm burned beyond burnout, and I refuse to let this thing go, whatever it is. And now my body's like, well, we're just gonna stop, and you're gonna have to let it go at that point, right? And it's so difficult to then implement that wellness component when you're that depleted. And what I hope and wish for Black women is, how do you have awareness of and guidance in creating kind of a wellness lifestyle that sustains your level of functioning, that gets built in along the way, rather than having to learn it if something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the moments that I think kind of stands out to me was becoming a mother, as a moment where it was a huge reminder that I had to create some balance in my life. And for me, it was helpful to have who I call my motherhood role models, right? And like, if their child was sick, they just left work. They didn't even think about it. They didn't apologize for it. They just left work. And if I didn't see that right at the beginning of my motherhood journey, I don't know that I would have incorporated it in the same way, And now I will say that my motherhood role models were not Black women. And so that's important to point out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good it was really important for me to be able to see that as a different way of being, I think the pandemic was another time where it was kind of like a reset, and you kind of think about the way that you're living your life. So I know that's been important for a lot of people as well. But when you see people move and operate in a different way, it's kind of a reminder that some of these things that we think have to be don't really have to be. There's lots of ways of being in the world.
I think building on that, if we think about how we expand our definition of what excellence is, we think about excellence as being productivity that's geared towards others, or external productivity. And what about the concept of being excellent as it relates to taking care of yourself, right? Being excellent as it relates to being aware of your needs, right? I think we can expand that definition of excellence and also shift the equation of what it takes to be successful, right? Taking time off, taking breaks, that's not a barrier or a roadblock to success. That's actually what will allow you to sustain it. Back to the word that was said earlier, right? Thinking about how you integrate taking care of yourself as a part of your journey to becoming and being excellent in a holistic way, right? And I think the other thing with boundaries is always tough. I think that's a part of what gets lost in the high achieving pieces. We don't have boundaries. We say yes to everything. This is why you can be burned out and still taking care of your twins and writing a book, is right, because we still have those moments where we say yes. But the way, and I know when we hear boundaries, people often think, oh, I don't want to say no. Like, I don't want to tell people no. And the way I try to explain boundaries to folks is, boundaries is not about telling people no. It's about choosing where you use your yes, right? It's about being very intentional about where you spend your time, your energy, and your resources, so that you can not be always giving your no to yourself. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's being intentional about that. And the other piece I say about boundaries is, boundaries occur in nature. If you've ever seen the sand and the way the water of an ocean coexist, boundaries occur in nature. So what's actually abnormal is not having boundaries. And so really thinking about boundaries don't stop anything. It allows things to coexist in a way that's sustainable and that creates some harmony. And so it's really an essential part of the equation, not something that gets in the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Last year I read like a financial book a month last year. And one of the things, again, kind of like mind blown, the author's goal of success is not working 40 hours a week. Their goal of success is like that 4-hour work week or 4 hours a day, something where you can have about, and that was something that was mind blowing to me because I think part of being high achieving is what Kensa was saying, where you kind of think like you just have to be productive all the time, you know? And sometimes we have to look inward and it's like, what is the life that I actually want to live, you know?
Yeah. So when we're thinking about our boundaries, it's really shifting our perspective of what our priorities are and then including us as one of those priorities. And I think that was, for me, one of the significant shifts was, well, when my children are young, I do want to be able to spend more time and to be with them, which means then I'm working less and to be okay that on my Vita, I don't have these things showing up in the same ways that I used to have. And a part of that too has been showing up and teaching other people about my shifting identity, where they are still holding, or we're still holding expectations of I'm doing this and I'm involved in these things. Even in my relationship, showing up different and having to set different expectations of what me being a partner is looking like. And I do want to acknowledge too the privilege of being able to say no, that there's some women, again, if I say no, I won't be able to feed my family. So there is some privilege with it that there was a lot, and appreciate Naomi Osaka and her, I'm saying no to tennis for right now, while also you have millions of dollars that can sustain you. So want to acknowledge that privilege. Don't want that to be a privilege, but to also recognize how some women could have struggles with being able to say no, and that there could be consequences with that. But when we're outside of the strong consequence line, that those no's can actually create more freedom for us.
Absolutely. I think, recognizing that we're all at different stations and we all have different realities. And so there is no one solution or one strategy that's going to work for everyone. And so it still may be possible to identify where can you find your space to pause and to breathe, even a little bit more than you might have space to do that now, right? And certainly acknowledging that there's privileges that exist all around. And so really thinking about what that looks like for you and your reality becomes key to any of this.
Yeah.
It brings me back to, I'm not sure who said it, but the idea of role models and modeling of how to do this and how to discern this, and thinking about what systems are we coming out of as individuals that either reinforces this idea that this is healthy, this is good, or that the opposite is the expectation. And when I think about my family history, we're an immigrant family. I watched my father work all the way up to age 70 before he retired, working, even though he had a position that was a 40-hour-a-week position, working 7 days a week, where he would bring work home. And it was touted as, this is a good thing. I'm taking care of the family. We need to give him space to do this, and so that was the family narrative around how much you're expected to give. And he was high achieving. He did very well in his positions. And then I think about work environments that I've been in where I can compare different spaces, where sometimes somebody would be coming in my door at 5 o'clock and saying, you need to go home. It's time. Or I remember where the space where I did burn out, it was, and this is, again, becoming a mother shifts everything, right? I was coming back off of, I'm not even going to call it parental leave because we didn't have parental leave. I cobbled together vacation time and used all my sick time. And I was home for 2 months, and my baby was under 3 months old. I was back to work, and there had been some shifts in leadership and shifts in responsibilities. And I remember putting everything in my calendar that I was supposed to do per week, and there were still 6 hours of tasks that literally didn't fit in that 8 to 5, taking out lunches, taking out no time to pump or anything, and there's still 6 hours, that I was expected to do. And I remember going to my supervisor and saying, I'm not sure how to do this. What are the options? And part of the recommendation is maybe you need to take some of that home and do it in the evenings after you put your baby to bed. And I remember thinking, this is not going to go well, but also feeling fear of, what does that mean? Can I say no? I don't have anything else to fall back on. And I tried. I tried to make it work for over a year, and that came, with, again, health consequences. Yeah.
Yeah, Mahlet, I'm sorry that you went through that. It sounds awful. Yeah, it sounds awful, but kind of to your point, like, it's based on the messaging that we get from the world around us and whether or not we're going to be supported for taking care of ourselves. That's huge, like, in that environment, you needed the support, it wasn't really just about you deciding on your own, like, you needed people to support you. And I even think about some of my clients sometimes, like, there's this fear I can feel from them when I suggest things like taking time off. And to Kimber's point, sometimes you have to unpack the layers of, like, generational trauma of, where did this messaging come from? Sometimes it's passed down that you can't take a break, and oftentimes people don't necessarily mean it always with bad intentions. You know what I mean? Sometimes they're just parroting what has been told to them, or, a default mode of the culture, of the environment. And so we really do have to start to push back against that and question some of these norms that we have in these environments.
To not acknowledge again what that is, that's that gender racism of, why would anybody be expected to have to work outside when I'm supposed to be with my family? And that those same expectations don't look the same for men, especially white men, in the way that it does for others. So yeah, this expectation of your excellence, and that you need to figure out how to maintain that excellence then, or the way that I see you as being excellent.
And it makes you feel like you don't have any choice but to sacrifice yourself, right? Because everything else has to be taken care of. And so the high achieving message then is coming from the system itself. And it's not even, I don't even know if it's high achieving at that point. It's just kind of, you have to manage it. If you've chosen to have all of these things in your life, then you have to figure out how to manage all of these things. And there is no regard for health or wellness. It's productivity over everything. And that there are a lot of occupational settings that operate with that as their default message, which does nothing to help address the high achieving. If you're already coming into a place high achieving, and then you have a system that's giving you that message, that's just compounded tenfold in terms of the space that you don't have, the extra work you feel you need to do, and the burnout that is waiting for you right around the corner, right? Like, it's just a recipe for stress and challenge and strife and possibly health complications.
And normalizing our self-care and focus on wellness and well-being, also want to normalize the benefits of therapy. So for Black women who are struggling with high achievement, or are experiencing those physical and those mental health consequences of being in environments where they're forced to maintain this idea of being high achieving, how does therapy benefit us?
I think somebody said earlier, we got to unpack those layers sometimes to even understand why we're doing what we're doing. But it also just gives you a safe space to be, right? That in and of itself can be huge, to just have a space that's dedicated to you,
Mhm.
right? And dedicated to helping, supporting, holding you, right? And just your job is to come in here and to be, right? And certainly we may ask you to do some other things along the way, but the first thing that we want you to do is to come in here and be, because that's our starting point.
Mhm. It's about
Or a safe place to cry, right?
who you are, not what you're doing or what you can produce. Mhm.
It's also a great place to kind of reality test of, wait, what are, these expectations, either self-imposed or systemic, um, where you can have a place to double check, like, wait, is this me? Or no, really, is this not okay? Is it okay to say no here? Or even to figure out the language for that, especially if you're not used to saying no, of here's somebody that you can test that out with. How do I want to say that? What does that sound like coming from me authentically? It's an opportunity to really put intentionality in your process and be able to kind of slow everything down, to be able to be thoughtful in how you want to move in these all different spaces.
Mhm. Yeah, I think about therapy being that reflection. So Mahlet, your example of I still had these 6 hours, but sometimes when we're in those spaces, we don't even recognize everything that's being asked of us. So then
Right.
coming into therapy and to be challenged with, you do not have the time to do this.
Right.
To hear those things, that reflection back, I think is important. And then having that support as we start to challenge ourselves, and then even start to challenge these systems that try to maintain that sense of excellence for us. So even really concrete things that Black women can benefit from coming to therapy in terms of getting FMLA assistance and short-term disability while you work through this work stress or this work trauma that you're experiencing. And that we don't want Black women to have to come into therapy in that burnout state. But when we do, our bodies need to be able to heal from that and to be able to come into therapy to do that healing work so that we're not feeling exhausted, we're not unable to concentrate. We don't go do a great job, 8, 10, 12 hours of work, and then we come home and we can't get off the couch. We can start to create our lives and our identities outside of work as well.
And the other piece that, as you were talking, that came up for me is sometimes it's hard for you to see the path out of where you are when you're in it, right? And so coming to therapy can allow you to hear a perspective from someone else on the outside that can help you see the paths that are just too difficult for you to see because you're walking, right? And you don't have time to try to find your way. You just have to try to stay the course. And in therapy, you might be exposed to other pathways that are available that are hard for you to see, but that might be viable paths to help you be healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think hope is a big part of that therapeutic process, because as a therapist, you've seen other people get out of it. You've seen, and so you can let your client know that it's possible. And that's the other reason why I think oftentimes, women need tribes. Like, we need that social support of women who have been through what we've been through as well. I feel like that's what friendship does for people. It provides them the resources and the hope, and gives them the story of people who have been through what they've been through.
Well, as we are wrapping up, Tammy, using that, our hope, what's one hope you have for high achieving Black women?
I hope more high achieving Black women let go of this need to achieve. I mean, as I started, I said that, I also identify with this. And I think that sometimes we think it's linked to happiness. It's linked to all these things that we want, and we don't realize sometimes that we can have those things that we want for ourselves without this achievement component being included, and so that's what I hope, like, that we slowly start to let go and let us ourselves be human.
I think that was standing out for me, is that we give ourselves permission to just be without the striving piece. The way I started to say that was that we would add ourselves to our to-do list so that all of our efforts and all of our energy are not constantly given away to everybody else, but that we truly give ourselves permission to be really intentional about trying to take better care of ourselves, and see that as an essential endeavor, not something that's extra or that gets in the way, but seeing taking care of ourselves as something that is critical to our, quite frankly, survival.
And I would add that you are valuable. Your wellness, your health, your quality of life is just as valuable as your achievements, if not more. And that women are able to choose themselves and feel okay choosing themselves. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean sacrificing achievement.
Mm-hmm. My hope is for rest, that we prioritize ourselves and prioritize our rest. Well, thank you all so much for participating in this conversation today. If you are watching this and you're interested in working with any of the speakers here, our information will be there for you. And then you can also turn to Counseling Black Women resources to find a therapist in your community. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.